You'll get there one of these days. Oh! What'd I tell you? Okay, put on your kimono. There you go. That's Maya. Wash me overboard. Here you go.
Good morning once again, Timothy. Good morning to everybody who is in Clubhouse now and watching us on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Apologies once again for the 1 second before the clip started. Well, it is the 130th session of Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley and me as a host, Maya Matsuoka, Japan Expert Insights. And I'm not going to keep you waiting and listening to me any longer because I want to give the floor to the star of this show, Timothy Langley. So, Timothy, it's you now. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maya. Today is August 6th. We're into August now, Maya. We've survived June, July, and now we're into August. This is the time of the year when politicians typically, the diet is closed down. August is pretty much a hot month here, and it is a time for politicians to go on junkets. They're called junkets, but they're basically study tours. Almost all the politicians take that opportunity because throughout the year, otherwise they're pretty much they just can't logistically do it. So a lot of people are on international tours, and it has created a little bit of a backwash, irritating the prime minister to no end. I'm going to be reporting on that. But first of all, welcome to August. August is the month of Obon. It is the time that, 2 months ago, the Battle of Okinawa ended, and with Okinawa secured by U.S. forces, it was just a matter of time before the onslaught to the main island happened, and that was kind of forestalled in August with the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and those were occurring in this very important month. So it's a month of great reflection and really a kind of somber time. We move into the Obon period next weekend. So next weekend is a 3-day weekend for those of you who are not living in Japan. And in next week, we kind of begin the Obon period. We will still be broadcasting. And by the way, please don't forget to like and share and provide a comment on this broadcast, because that really helps us. It helps promote our numbers and enhances the analytics for the broadcast. Like Maya said, this is our 130th consecutive Sunday briefing. Maya, can you turn your mic off? I can hear you chewing on your mouse.
Oh, sure, yes.
Thank you. Our 130th consecutive briefing. If you like it, please tell people about it. Please continue to join us. I try and wrap up this briefing as tightly as I can in 30 minutes, and then we go into a Q&A. So thank you very much for joining. Let's get right into it. So the My Number issue is irritating the Prime Minister. He went on television on Thursday to report that this idea that was passed in the law to have the My Number system merged with the national insurance card is going forward. There's been a lot of controversy over the last couple of months about mistakes, snafu, sharing of information because the people holding the cards, maybe they have the identical same name, first name and last name, and the information somehow became a little bit corrupted, or maybe the entry card was a little bit not handled appropriately at the beginning stages. So there has been some issues there. It's pretty much tarnished the image of one of our favorite Japanese politicians, Kono Taro, who is the minister of the digital agency. His brand has taken a bit of a heating internally and within the LDP, but not so much outside, I think, of Japan, although everybody's looking for somebody to blame on this one. Nevertheless, the Prime Minister has said, we're still going forward with that. There was an idea that maybe it would be postponed, that the merger would be postponed, but he really kind of took a bold step. And actually, when you think about it, if the country is truly going to be going towards a digitalized society and to fulfill the dream and the drive and the purpose for establishing the digital agency in the first place, this kind of national social security number and the merging of that card with other benefits or attributes of being affiliated with the government, paying taxes, receiving benefits and subsidies, that sort of thing. It really does need to go forward. So I think it's just a blip. And although maybe Minister Konotaro might take a little bit of a beating on it because of his, his image and his popularity, I don't think it's going to be seriously diminishing to him. So my number is going forward. It was passed into the law just in this last diet session to merge those two. So the Japanese government is going forward. In other news, and it shouldn't take the UN to come and send a team to evaluate, sexual improprieties and abuse happening in Japan and damaging a certain segment of the Japanese population. But that's exactly what happened. The UN sent a team on sexual abuse to Japan a week ago, maybe almost 10 days ago. We reported on this last week, and they've just left Japan. I think they left Japan yesterday, the delegation did, but not without having a press conference and a release of their preliminary report. This all centers around Johnny's Gym Show. Johnny's Gym Show is the talent agency that for years has dominated providing boy bands and talent singing performers to the Japanese television and entertainment industry. It was very popular. It was dominated by Johnny's Gym Show. Johnny Kitagawa was the leader of that. He died 2 years ago at the age of 84. And then it came out how he was, abusing many of these young boys who were aspiring actors or singers or dancers sexually. And they've come out, and since he's been dead, and they've really lambasted him. They've lambasted Johnny's Gym Show, the company, for the very, very temporary kind of investigation they did, the internal report, without much of a mea culpa about what they did and how many people they damaged. So the UN sent in a team, and it's pretty embarrassing for Japan to be told by somebody from the outside that you need to get your act together, that these people, all of these victims have been subjugated to not only censure, but also the entire society and the industry has kept them in the back, and perhaps tacitly acknowledging it's okay for Johnny's Gym Show to do that because they produce and they perform and they provide so much entertainment to the industry, the television and the entertainment industry, that maybe we'll just take a blind eye look at this. So it's a big issue. The UN came in, they left on Sunday. They've issued their report. If you're interested in that, please, let's talk about it in the Q&A session. Japan has decided to restart one of its sleeping nuclear reactors, Kansai Electric, which handles electricity in the southern part of Japan, a large manufacturer of or provider of electricity, has decided to restart a 42-year-old nuclear reactor. It's been on mothballs for the last 12 years since the nuclear reactor accident in Fukushima. So like many of the nuclear reactors throughout Japan, it was stopped. There were a couple that were just moving on a minimum basis, but for the vast majority of them, nuclear reaction plants were temporarily stopped, some of them for 12 years. This is the first one to go back online, full bore, 42 years old. So this is also in accommodation with the law that the Japanese government passed just this last year to extend the lifespan of these nuclear reactors. It was initially, they were built to last 20 years, that was extended to 40 years. And now under new legislation, they can be extended with upkeep and maintenance to 60 years. And this is the first one out of the chute. It is one of the oldest reactors in Japan. It will start producing electricity throughout the Kansai region almost immediately. So this is something of a taste of things to come. With Fukushima now in the background, with the release of the nuclear tainted water into the Japanese Sea. That is expected to be this month. That will happen. It's been reported very prominently in the press, but the release date has not been released. But the restart of the nuclear reactor is pretty important because not only is the electricity expensive and limited as a result of the nuclear reactors being shut down. I mean, at their peak before Fukushima, they were providing about 24% of all of the energy needs of the Japanese archipelago. And so that went down. LNG, oil, coal-fired plants shot up in prominence. So now this reactor restart, and this is the first, is aimed at trying to keep down the consumption of LNG gases. And they have great prospects for doing that right away. So what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on with Sakhalin 1 and Sakhalin 2, which are LNG plants run out of Russia in the Far East. They have the island of Sakhalin, their nuclear, the LNG plants that are there. Japan is an investor in there, a big time investor, probably 1/3 of the shares are held by Japanese companies. So LNG is being sourced from Russia, even in spite of the sanctions. But the reliance on LNG in the absence of nuclear is going to be addressed. And this is the first shoot out of the barrel. So keep your eyes peeled for more of this sort of thing to be happening. The next shoot of all, I think, is probably the announcement of the release of the water into the Pacific. Already, people who are running Japanese restaurants throughout China are preparing for the worst, because once this water is released, I think there will probably be a ban on Japanese foodstuffs. And for these sushi restaurants or the Japanese restaurants, teppanyaki, they're very popular throughout the world, but in Japan, in China as well. And I think many of these operators are going to have to shut down because the Chinese government is so opposed to they're opposed to anything that's related to Japan at this point, but also they have a good excuse with the release of the water. Hong Kong has already pretty much said that they're going to prevent the release, prevent the importation of Japanese foodstuffs, fresh food and seafood in particular. So this is going to be a big hit for the Japanese economy. If China is Japan's number one trade partner, so with foodstuffs and seafood taking a hit like that, it is going to be very difficult for them to continue. There's more news that I'll get into on importation and food restrictions, but for right now, I just wanted to remind you about that. Governor Koike, Yuriko Koike, is in her second 4-year term as governor of Tokyo. Tokyo is a prefecture and it is also a city. The governor is also the main city administrator. She ran 8 years ago and garnered the second largest number of votes for any governor that has run in the election. And so clearly she is a shoo-in if she decides. So a little bit of rumblings, a little bit of telegraphing is already occurring now. The election is not until 2024, September of 2024. So next year in 2024 is a very active year in terms of Japanese politics. The re-election or the term of the current prime minister ends around that same time. And also it is time for the lower house to also have their election. So it will be very active. In any event, Ms. Koike will probably run again. Her political party, Tokyo First, is likely to promote her and to garner more voters for her area. The LDP is unlikely to run a candidate in opposition to her because it's obvious that she's going to win. Ishin is likely to run a candidate for Tokyo governor. It is not clear yet, but Ishin is making great strides throughout Kansai and Tokyo as well, and the prefectures surrounding Tokyo. So we can anticipate something like that. But the issue of Governor Koike will be mentioned a little bit more frequently as we get closer to that date. And also any movement by Ishin with regard to the Tokyo elections, because I mean, Tokyo is the largest city in Tokyo. Fully 10% of the entire Japanese population live in the megalopolis that is known as Tokyo, which is not just Tokyo proper, but also the surrounding areas where people live and commute into Tokyo. So it's a pretty big deal. We're going to keep our eye on that. The EU, so Japan continues to build this coalition of like-minded countries. There's a lot going on there with Japan and Italy, with Australia, United States, and Japan, a lot of military and naval exercises. The most recent news that came out of the European Union is that the food restrictions that were imposed in 2011 because of the nuclear disaster and the massive earthquake and tsunami that happened then, most of the European countries also limited food coming in from around 10 prefectures surrounding that area. So in concert with this coalition building effort and the G7 and the enormous energy that is being devoted by the Biden administration to form this coalition in response to what China seems to be attempting to do with Taiwan, is taking great momentum. And one of those momentums just came out this week, where the EU is dropping its restrictions on trade restrictions for food imports and seafood coming from Japan. This is a very big deal. So Norway and Iceland and the EU, that consists of 52 economies that will be dropping their import restrictions. It is not everybody. There's probably 9 other countries who still are imposing import restrictions on Japanese foodstuffs. One of them is Switzerland. It will relinquish these restrictions on August 15th. And the 9 prefectures that will be benefiting from that, I mean, 9 prefectures, that is huge, especially when I'm going to tell you who they are. And when I mention their names, pictures of fruit and typical Japanese specialties will come to mind. So having those prevented from being exported to throughout Europe is a very big deal. So these prefectures include Fukushima, obviously, Miyagi, Yamagata, Ibaraki, Gunma, Niigata, Yamanashi, Nagano, Iwate, and Shizuoka. So this is a very big deal. It's a good boost in the arm for the prime minister, because these economies will now benefit as a result of that. In other news, TSMC is the world's largest producer of high-end chips and specialty technology for satellites, for military use, and that sort of thing. In the fear that perhaps China might move on Taiwan, there has been a great effort over the last 2 years to move some of TSMC's high technology manufacturing processes out of Taiwan and into Japan, into the United States. So there are a couple of projects that are already ongoing in Arizona and in Kumamoto in Japan. So there's been movement there now. The Japanese government has already broken ground. They're constructing a huge manufacturing process in Kumamoto. They're probably going to be paying for about half of that, so that other companies that come in, Apple, contact Microsoft, who come in to also jointly produce or help in the facilitation of chip production, will be building this enormous plant. They've decided that they're going to have a second plant. It was announced just this last week. And once again, the names that keep coming up when they're mentioned in Japanese political briefings, it's the same names, and they're names of people who, if you hear them enough times, it indicates to you that they are in the realm of coming up for potential prime minister's position. One name that comes up pretty frequently is the LDP policy chief, Mr. Hagiura. And he is known as one of the people who's in charge of this chip production within the LDP. And he announced on Friday that the Japanese government will probably pay 1/3 of the cost for the second plant. They also have a third plant, Rapidus. You might have heard of Rapidus. It's a consortium of a lot of the companies, global companies, that have decided to get permits for production and construction of a huge manufacturing facility in Hokkaido. So you've got southern Japan, where it's pretty close to, if there's going to be kinetic action with regard to China and Taiwan, Okinawa, it's pretty much in that area. Rapidus, they've decided to build in northern Hokkaido. Northern Hokkaido has its own issues, as it's close to Sakhalin, and as I reported last week, there were joint naval exercises between Russian and Chinese naval vessels, live fire drill, integration of forces, that sort of thing, as they passed through the strait separating Hokkaido from Sakhalin. So, you know, the whole region is fraught with danger and tension. So, in any event, chip production needs to go on. If it stops in any way, it's going to definitely cause a global recession. And this is Mr. Kishida's attempt to address that issue. The chips, let me see, the production of chips this year will be about $7 billion. It is equivalent to about 1 trillion in yen. And the target for Japan, Mr. Kishida has announced that he is going to be devoting 10 trillion yen for the next 10 years so that Japan can reassert its dominance in chip production. So the manufacturing facilities in TSMC in southern Japan are high-end chips, and in the northern part of Hokkaido, it is for mass production of the typical used chips in cars and computers, that sort of thing. So it's a kind of a full court press that Japan has decided it is going to do. You know, try and really reestablish themselves. So it will take a couple of years. Apparently, TSMC, the plant number 1, will be in production in next year, and they intend to be generating a profit within the next 2 years. So it's highly anticipated what's going to happen there. Japan, you know, many people say Japan in 2019 was in the earlier part of the 20s. Japan was somewhat advanced. It was producing products that were appreciated all over the world, and that development kind of stalled. And in 2019, it kind of plateaued out. So even we're in 2024 right now, not much progress has been made technologically since 2019. We had COVID as in the meantime too. But what the plan is for the Japanese government is to, number 1, digitize the entire economy, including the management of administration and the logistics, and moving closer to having the entire population digitized. So that's why the digital agency, and whenever we have a controversy with Konotaro or the My Number system, it is always causes a bit of a worry. But with the chips and the condensers and the plants going online, Japan is really going to come to the forefront again. It's going to take a couple of years before that comes up, but that is definitely in the mix. We reported last week, and probably a little bit earlier too, about the 2024 Kansai EXPO. It is the formal name is the Osaka Kansai Japan Expo, slated for 2025. South Korea, just this last week, is the first country to submit a proposal for a pavilion. So there are 50 pavilions that should be built by countries promoting their wares. There's probably another 100 or 120 countries that will come that will be renting space. But there are 50 pavilions that need to be run and owned and operated by specific countries. Nobody is really signing up for that. It's got the Japanese government and the Osaka government very concerned about that. One of the other names that comes up pretty frequently is Nishimura He is the trade minister, and he's come up with an an idea in response to this lack of people coming in, the countries coming in to build the pavilions. There are three types: A type, B type, and C type. The A type is the high quality one that is designed and constructed by the individual countries, and they have to submit their building plans, and they have to meet certain requirements. The expo will last for about 6 months, and then they leave the building there, and the Japanese government comes in to take over the buildings and manage those and put new operators in there. The place where the expo is right next door to where the casino is being built. So this is a really hot area for construction and also for future development in a man-made island called Umenoshima. So we're going to talk, Maya, about the casino issue at the end of this briefing, but this is a big deal for Japan to get this island developed and have other countries to come in and help with that. They are reluctant because of the cost of labor and the cost of materials, and it's not really, I think people are just not really that sold that it's going to be a good investment for them. So the Japanese government is coming in with a little bit more support. Nishimura provided an idea of having insurance for the construction companies should they be involved with these construction projects, and the contracting party doesn't pay them, or doesn't pay them when they present the bill, or they don't pay them enough, that the Japanese government will come in and take care of that. So it provides a little bit more security for them. But it is a very hot, very big deal. You'll hear more about this. I mean, it's a big deal right now that South Korea just submitted their bid. This is also something that, you know, with the Yoon and Kishida relationship beginning to bloom, they're all asking each other, you know, can you do me a favor? I'll do a favor for you. Can you contribute? Can you participate in, for example, the construction of TSMC, which they have agreed to, sharing in the technology there too, but also with the expo. You know, I'm not getting a lot of traction on companies coming in. So could you do me a favor and submit a bid? So you've got that going on too. And it's actually going on across the board. Japan and Italy just this week went into drills, flight drills on the consortium that is building the new jet, the new fighter jet. So Italy and Japan have joined forces. They're building a new jet. Some people would say that is a violation of Article 9 of the Constitution. Still, Japan is moving very, very briskly forward to creating something of an military industrial complex. They've watched what the United States did with that, and other countries. They want a piece of that action too. They're a little bit late to the game, but you can see that development of dual technologies, dual purpose technologies, and finished products are coming up more and more. So the Japanese government is putting money into that. They're inviting companies to come into Japan to help develop defense capabilities. And this new development, it's not a new development, but it's just being announced that the fighters have been in production and they're going through test flights right now, is a pretty big deal for these advanced fighters. Let me see what else we've got going on here. There was a report just this last week about the drop in English speaking ability of Japanese students. I'm sure you saw this because it is somewhat shocking that the test was administered in April by the Japanese government. It was a pretty broad test. Maybe 42,000 students were tested in 500 junior high school and high school schools. They wanted to test what the ability is of reading, writing, speaking in English. They do it across the board. It's math skills too. But one of the alarming things that came out of this survey was that 60% of the people who took the test were unable to answer any question accurately or correctly on the oral component of the test. So that comes out pretty shockingly because it's It's actually the first time the test was administered since 2019. So we've got the entire COVID period in between there, but it also is based on a test that was revised and administered differently from the 2019 test. So the Japanese government is kind of saying the test results are not really reflective of a decline in the ability of the students for speaking and utilizing English as a second language. But in fact, in across the board, the diminution in performance is somewhat remarkable. The reports on listening comprehension and in speaking fell 18.4 points since the last time it was administered. And 60%, as I said, 60% of the students who took the test got zero. They got no oral and speaking ability test answered correctly. 46% were okay with the reading, listening, and writing part, but that was just a dip of about 10% from the last time the test was administered. Once again, the Japanese government says it's nothing to be alarmed about because the test was tweaked. It is a harder test this time, and maybe the ability or the interest of the students towards external Japan is in fact increasing. Fewer and fewer people are applying for home study throughout the United States or graduate degrees. There's been a big dip there, but hopefully it's been identified as an issue. And with the number of foreigners that are coming in, by the way, it's just a remarkable number. It even surprises the people in the Ministry of Tourism for the vast number of people who are coming in. And you can't miss it if you're living in probably anywhere in Japan. You've noticed the vast number of people who are coming in and visiting Japan. So it's somewhat attributed to the inability to travel to Japan over the last 4 years, but also there's a lot more interest in what's going on in Japan. And further to that, there's a lot of people from foreign countries who are actually moving to Japan to set up residence here. There was a report on residence restrictions being relaxed for minors, for people who are coming here with their family. It received a lot of press, but when you look at the details, it's mostly minors who are accompanying their foreign parents. There are going to be a little bit less restrictions on them to live here, establish their residency. But in any event, they're with their parents and they're not going to be separate from their parents. So it's kind of a lot of flash about not too much. But I think what it indicates is that, like with the visas for entertainers, there's a relaxation there. So people who are coming to Japan on an entertainer's visa, there was a restriction on that because there were too many people coming in. They would have a gig and then they would vacation throughout Japan. It caused a little bit of trouble there, but they're beginning to relax that now. So more entertainers will be coming into Japan. And this thing with the minors gaining residency across the board, you can see Japan is kind of trying to accommodate the reality that the Japan population is shrinking. As reported last month, in all prefectures, they have reported that there's a decline in population. This is the first time that's happened in the post-war era. Since the end of the war, the population has continued to increase. And so now it's on the downslide, and it is affecting the entire country. So one of the ways to accommodate that is to bring in foreign workers, foreign laborers, investors, business people. And you can see it on the edges here. It hasn't gone full bore, but you can see that attempts are being made. Moving on to Mr. Kishida, the Prime Minister of Japan. We've talked about this before, that you want to keep the appearance of scandals within your inner circle to a minimum. The Prime Minister, when he first became Prime Minister, had to release 4 of his ministers because of the Unification Church and because of funny money. but and also there was one death. So he had to kind of juggle things. Japanese prime ministers typically don't have to deal with that number of resignations or terminations within the cabinet. But now the prime minister has two other issues that he's got to confront. He's got the continuing issue with Mr. Kihara, who is his right-hand man. He's within the Kishida faction. And Bunshun is just hammering him maybe 6 weeks in a row, reporting on the murder initially ascribed to as a suicide of his current wife's former husband. This occurred about 10 years ago. And because she was dating Mr. Kihara at that time, at the time of the death of the husband of his current wife, the investigation became really squirrely. And although when you look at it now, it was clearly a murder, his neck was sliced with a knife. At the time and throughout the entire period, it was characterized as a suicide. Even though there was controversy, there was a fight between the husband and the wife over the children, the possession of the children, which is an issue that plagues Japan perennially. And the fact that Mr. Kihara was in the government, very prominent in the government, probably prevented the prosecutor's office from moving aggressively. So there's a lot of questions now about the oversight by the chief cabinet secretary, and Mr. Kihara is the second in command for the chief cabinet secretary. So very critical, very important for the prime minister. That's issue number one. Issue number two is a deputy minister was actually, he resigned this week because of the allegations of bribery. He was in the Ministry of Land Transportation and Tourism because of his involvement with a company that was giving him money, apparently, for wind generation. So I love this story because it has all of the elements of your typical insider bribery case. If you look at the details of it, there wasn't an association established for managing and for interacting with the Japanese government on the provision of licenses for wind generation, for solar panels, for that sort of thing. And in this consortium, there was very powerful, very well connected to the LDP and reporting to the Minister of Land and Transportation and Tourism. The vice minister here, he was approached by a company that didn't belong to the consortium, but wanted a piece of that action. They had tried to get into the consortium and get some licenses facilitated. They were unsuccessful there. And apparently they ingratiated themselves with this vice minister. And apparently they met, the story is, on the racehorse, because of racehorses. They were both interested in investors in racehorses. And with racehorses and with betting, parimutuel betting for racehorses is allowed in Japan. Typically, Japan outlaws any form of gambling, but there are 3 or 4 areas that it is acknowledged. That's motorboat racing, kidding, bicycle racing, and horse racing. There's also pachinko, but it's somewhat in a different category. But this approach and the facilitation of funds to this vice minister really broke open this last week. And so you might have noticed that a lot of companies that are in this industry are starting to withdraw because of just the difficulty of the regulations, but also because of this kind of scandal that's coming up. So it's unfortunate that's happened, and I'm sure it hurts the prime minister greatly. It is not a minister, but it is a vice minister. And so the idea that the prime minister needs to reshuffle his cabinet every day that passes, there's just a bigger burden that he needs to do that sooner rather than later. Earlier, the prognosis was that he would do that sometime in September, have a shuffle of the cabinet, and then open the Diet for an extraordinary session. But it might be accelerated now. I think doing it in August is very unlikely. But yet again, there is another scandal that came up. I think it's been solved and maybe pushed in the background. But Matsukawa Dewey is a member of the upper house. And like I said earlier, in August, many of the politicians go on these overseas tours. And in regular fashion, Matsukawa Dewey took a delegation of LDP women to France. And they went to France to study, the education of 3-year-olds and how the government is providing this kind of education for children and to help the mothers. And does that, what kind of impact that has on reproduction. So they took a very big delegation. Matsukawa Dewey was at the head of the delegation, and they were photographed in front of the Eiffel Tower doing a pose like this, like mimicking the Eiffel Tower, just like tourists typically do. And that was produced in social media or circulated in social media, and it caused a big brouhaha. And the reason for the brouhaha was that if you go to a foreign country during August on a study group, you shouldn't be having fun. So don't have fun. If you're related to the government, you're not supposed to have fun. It's the same issue with the prime minister's son having a dinner party during the end of the year break. He had a dinner party at his house, and people, they drank, they ate, they fooled around. And the fact that the prime minister lives in the official residence and they took some inappropriate pictures caused a big, big deal. So you can have dinner, but you're just not supposed to have fun. You're not supposed to goof around. And apparently this is hurting Matsukawa Dewey as well. The story that is being promoted is, it's just a junket. They went there, and just like any tourist, they really didn't do any study group. They went on the government's dime, and they, 30, 35 people enjoyed, going to France and eating and drinking and just screwing around. That's the story that's being promoted. Excuse me. I suspect, because it's not, to me, it's not a big deal. The optics are not so great, but I don't think it's a big deal. They just had a photo op. But I think it's also Ishin kind of poking fun at Matsukawa Dewey, who is in the Abe faction. So it's a dig not only at the Abe faction, but also at the LDP, that you guys are just money guys and we're coming after you. There are 2 upper house seats in Osaka. Matsukawa Dewey occupies one of them. And in fact, interestingly enough, the seat that she occupies is the same seat of the fellow who hired me out of Japanese law school when I entered the Diet, 35 years ago. So we know each other. She's also a Georgetown graduate. I follow her very carefully. I get briefings from her on her monthly Benkyokai. So I think it's just one of these flies in the ointment. It is going to be solved. But for the prime minister, it's just like, God, another one of these things. When is this ever going to cool down? It's not going to cool down. And it really implicates the prime minister. He needs to do something to regenerate his standings. So his standings now, his political standings, the appreciation of him as prime minister and as the cabinet representing Japan, it is at its lowest point. It hasn't been lower since he's been prime minister. So he needs to do something to boost that. One way, typically when prime ministers are in this position, is to realign the cabinet. The other way is to wait for an opportune time and have an election. He really shouldn't do that. He's not in a position to do that. But a realignment of the cabinet. The only problem with the realignment of the cabinet is you have new people coming in, and sometimes they bring their baggage with them that due diligence just didn't prepare you for. So you've got that as a bit of a danger too. Moving on to Japan having 2% of their GDP devoted to defense spending. It's a 5-year plan, maybe 4 trillion every year being devoted to take Japan from 1% of its GDP to 2% of its GDP in a 5-year period. The Japanese government has told the prime minister, we don't know where this money is going to come from. You've already said you're going to increase defense spending. You've already spent much of that. The Japanese government has already spent 127% more than it spent last year, just this year in enhancing defense capabilities, and also in kind of attempting to develop this military industrial complex here in Japan, and also just many of the alignments that they're doing with Australia, with New Zealand, with Britain, France, and Italy, as I mentioned earlier. So there's a lot going on there. The auditors have told the prime minister, we don't know where you're going to get the money, so you're going to need to enhance taxes. You're going to have to take the taxes from 10% to maybe 12% or 13%. And he said, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. My popularity is already low. What's the other idea? And the other idea is, let's sell some of the assets that the Japanese government holds. So that seems to be the current flavor of the month. We talked about this. Maya and I talked about this. We reported on it maybe 5 weeks ago on the list of assets that are being held by the Japanese government. So the prime minister said when this idea first came out, there were 4 areas that he would get money from to pay for this enhanced defense spending. One would be on an enhanced tobacco tax. One would be on corporate taxes, not a regular consumption tax. One would be on I forget what the third one is, but the fourth one was, we will tighten our belts and we will find out other places we can save money. And this idea consists of all of these companies that the Japanese government has investments in. So the most starking of those is NTT. So Japan, the Japanese government owns about 33% of NTT. And so the idea now is to sell off NTT to come up with those funds. It doesn't cover the base, but it's one of the ideas. So I think once it begins to happen, once there's acknowledgement that they can generate funds to pay for that and sidestep the possibility of increasing the consumption tax, which would just kill the prime minister, there would be an uproar about that. So he's come up with a couple of ideas. NTT would, there's about a 4.7 trillion investment of the Japanese government in NTT. That's about 33%. The Japanese law requires the Japanese government, if they're going to invest in NTT, which required a law from the Japanese government, then it needs to hold 33%. So as many of you might know or might not know, there's a certain calibration below which, if you don't hold 33% of the shares, your rights as a shareholder are diminished. So they needed to be above the 33% threshold so that they could be fully engaged in the operations and the management of the company. It's not like 51%, but it is better than something below 33%. So the Japanese law is they need to have 33%. So they need to change the law in order to do this, but this would generate 4.7 trillion yen, which would cover maybe 1 year of defense spending, a little bit more than 1 year. So it looks like they're going to be doing that, and perhaps even doing it this month. So that would require a little bit of a fine tuning of the Japanese law. There's also a huge management of Tokyo metropolitan transportation system, so the subway system that is in Tokyo. Much of this is owned by the Japanese government, managed, construction, everything was done by the Japanese government and the Tokyo metropolitan government. So the Japanese central government owns 53% of that asset, and they're thinking of privatizing that. That would perhaps generate 310 billion yen. They also have holdings in a bank, the Shokochukin Bank. They own 46% of that. That would generate 209 billion. Japan Tobacco has something of a monopoly, not a firm monopoly. It used to have a monopoly on all tobacco products sold in Japan. The privatized part of it, the Japan government still owns 33.4% of it. That would generate 2.1 trillion yen if they sold off all the shares. And then Japan Post Holdings. Japan Post as you might remember, under the Koizumi administration, was privatized. It was a big deal. He almost was kicked out of office as a consequence of that, but he was successful in doing it. The Japanese government holds 34.3%. So as you see here, all of the holdings are beyond 33%. And if they sold off the entire share there of Japan Post Holdings, it would generate 1.3 trillion. So you pull all of these together, and now it starts to actually make, equal real money, and the Japanese government could potentially take care of the defense spending, get it back up to 2% or get to 2% within the 5 years. But there's a lot going on here. In addition to that, you might remember that I said last week that the restrictions on Japan trading with China for these manufacturing processes that produce the chips, the high-end chips, to China. So they are putting restrictions there, no more trade with those kinds of items on Wednesday of last week, in alliance with the United States to restrict these kinds of trade flows to China, to prevent them from having higher end technology in the anticipation of perhaps a kinetic conflict. So Japan is a part of that. And with regard to the production and machining of chips and these high-end capacitors, also the chemicals that go with it, Japan was relegated and assigned agreement to restrict those, not immediately, but the deadline was this last week. Not maybe as a direct consequence of that, but on Wednesday, the Nikkei suffered its largest fall in shares in several years. The Nikkei lost 2.3% on Wednesday. The Nikkei average is 225 major corporations. Their shares are sold on the Nikkei Stock Exchange. There's other exchanges. There's Topix, which is more small and medium companies that are traded on the stock exchange, which is called Topix. Topix also had a 1.24% drop in their share prices. This is really a huge development. So Japan stocks have been increasing over the last couple of months, and this hit here is really worrisome. In addition to that, the Japanese yen, we were kind of bragging about the Japanese yen being strong, maybe 130 yen to the dollar, 132 yen to the dollar over the last couple of weeks. It shot to 143 yen to the dollar just this last week. So there is great movement that's going on there. And stocks throughout Japan have been suffering. There's another trading house for stocks that includes all of Southeast Asia, excluding Japan, and they also took a hit. I think they had a diminution of around, 2%. The stocks hitting, coming from the high-end chip makers, Tokyo Electron dropped 3.12%, Advantest 4.48%, and Nomura Holdings dropped 8%. This is a huge shock to the system here. Toyota, on the other hand, exceeded earnings. Their earnings and their shares increased 2%, and the amount of sovereign credit that is assigned to that is just huge for the economy. So once again, another punch in the face to the prime minister, who is trying hard to bring his numbers up. At the same time, the ratings agency Fitch downgraded the United States from AA plus to AAA, and this is a hit to the U.S. economy. So it's not just happening here in Japan. The chip the chip manufacturing process that's being shipped to China was done at the request of the United States, but also the United States is suffering a hit there too. Their economy seems to be picking up in the United States, but they have their own issues as well. And the fact that they've gone down in ratings, I'm sure it's upset the White House, but there's a lot going on there. And so something to keep your eye on. in this month, so today is the 6th, let's see, on the 18th of this month, there will be a summit between President Yoon of South Korea, Mr. Kishida of Japan, and Joe Biden of the United States at Camp David. It'll be the first actual summit between Japan and South Korea and the United States, although the three countries have met on the sidelines. So this is a pretty big deal. You can anticipate that more news will be coming out of that. This relationship between Japan and South Korea is beginning to take more form. We talked about, Korea volunteering to come in and submit their proposal for the pavilion in the expo. It's across the board there. The fish and the foodstuffs, the restrictions there. South Korea has already decided that those restrictions will be dropped, even though the release of the water from Fukushima is predicted to cause a lot of concern there among the consumers. Korea and Japan are working in close concert to kind of diminish those concerns. So the relationship between Japan and Korea is really beginning to take hold. There's still a little bit of concern there with the trading of information, with the firing of rockets from North Korea and how they determine where it's going and how high it's going and what kind of payload it has really requires Japan, South Korea, and the United States to join forces to kind of figure that out. So there's a lot going on the military end of that too. Maya, I think I've gone a little bit long. I apologize for that, but I'm eager to take on the Q&A portion of this, and I hope I've responded to the hottest issues that are going on right now. But this is something we talk about every week. So for those of you in the audience that this is of some interest to, please continue to tune in every Sunday as we address these issues again.
Thank you, Timothy. Yes, we have actually, quite a few people in Clubhouse, and Evan is there as well, Captain Burke. And his question is about, so that is the decline in the technological sector in Japan. So Evan is driving at the moment, and he referred to his article on LinkedIn about the decline there, and he would like to hear your thoughts about it. So the reasons why it is happening and so on. So if you can comment now, let's do that. If not, we can do that next week.
Okay, so Evan posted on LinkedIn a report about the decline of, actually about the mix that Japanese companies devote to internal production of software and how much they farm out to third-party providers. Right. And in the United States, it's pretty well divided into three sections, almost 33% for what's done in-house, what is farmed out, and what is off the shelf. And in Japan, the numbers are very, very different. Evan's article that he referenced and he posted generated a lot of heat, a lot of action. And I think that's what, and sorry, by the way, Evan, I'm not on Santana today or Garuda to give you a hand and helping you launch that yacht. But yeah, the people are trying to figure out so many of the complexities of why Japan is still in the doldrums. How come Japan in the early 2010s, before 2020, before COVID hit, that period of time was just kind of somewhat stagnating. Whereas before there was, they came up with the Walkman, they came up with so many innovative ideas, and people are trying to figure out how Japan ended up in this situation and how they can get themselves out. So the Kishida government has also said, maybe we need to, by osmosis, learn from what they're doing in Silicon Valley. So he's come up with a plan of sending 100 people a year to Silicon Valley to live in Silicon Valley, to work in these companies, to kind of figure out how they do it there, with the dream that they're going to come back to Japan and they're going to bring some of the technologies and some of the mindset with them. But the idea is for generating Japan back up. I think what we talked about with the chip manufacturing process in Kumamoto and also in Hokkaido, they've realized that they need to actually be in production, which Japan was famous for, and they kind of offshored it in the early 2000s, and they began to have all of their products, the high-end televisions and the white products that Japan was famous for, being produced elsewhere and imported in Japan. So you'd go to the cheap labor, you'd export the technology and the IP, they would build it there, and this has kind of come back to bite them. So they're really struggling hard to figure out what is the mix. And when they look at how the United States is spending money on the shelf or off the shelf software products, how they're hiring consultants to deal with their own particular issues and what they do in-house to try and recreate that kind of balance. Because if it works for the United States, it works for some of these high-end European countries. Maybe Japan should follow that lead, because maybe this is the source of why they've been in deadlock for the last 20 years. So I'm sure there are other people that are more deeply ingrained in that industry. And if you've got some input on that, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yes, if somebody in the room, in Clubhouse, or even on LinkedIn, watching on LinkedIn, if you have more information about this and opinions, please share them with us. We're trying to be as interactive as possible. Great. Okay. And there is another thing, Timothy. Last time we actually talked about the casinos in Japan, and there was a question about what is going on with the casinos, because there was a lot of talk before the pandemic. Then, of course, understandably, that talk disappeared during the pandemic. So, I wonder whether we can just touch upon this topic as well today.
Okay. So the proper name for talking about this issue is not casinos. You're supposed to say the appropriate word, which is integrated resorts. So
yes,
there was
I apologize for the terminology.
Right. There was no. It's natural. I mean, the casinos consist of less than 2% of the floor space of these integrated resorts. 3%. Okay, so
Yes.
they're a small part of it, but they generate maybe 80% of the revenue.
Yes.
So it's supposed to be for business centers, for conferences, for exhibition halls, hotels, and theaters. So if you've ever been to Makahari or even to Big Sight, it's something like that. These huge exposition halls with hotels, and then you can get married there. So it is a really big deal, and it's the first one out of the chute. So they passed the integrated resort law last year. Maybe 4 years ago. They went through a very arduous bidding process, and then they finally awarded the bid for this integrated resort in Yume-no-shima. It is the first one, but they say that there'll probably be 3 or 4 of them. And for this integrated resort, probably in the first 2 or 3 years, it will be populated by about 70% domestic people. And the problem with that is that, I don't know, maybe it doesn't hit people's radars, but it is well known that Japan is packed full of people who are crazy about gambling. So because of law and legislation, it is kept to a minimum, but the propensity of Japanese to really fall into the hole and gamble is very high. So they have a lot of, they've actually done studies that have said that there's 2% of the entire Japanese population that are afflicted with some form of gambling addiction, if you can believe that. So it's a big issue. It's quiet. There are very few areas where the people can actually legitimately gamble. Horse racing, boat racing, bicycle racing, and to a lesser degree, pachinko. Pachinko is somewhat unregulated, but pachinko, let me tell you, pachinko generates so much money in Japan. So of this one integrated resort, they anticipate, well, it's going to cost, let me see, about 1.8 trillion yen to build. So that's about $8 billion to build the casino. But when it's up and running, it's going to be generating about $520 billion yen per year. That's $3.9 billion per year. So if you think about $3.9 billion per year revenue generation, and the cost of production is $8.1 billion, that's probably a pretty good deal. You're going to recoup somewhere around 3 or 4 years of management with, excuse me, with only 70% coming from the Japanese population. And also, if you're Japanese and you want to go to the casino portion of the integrated resort, you're somewhat restricted. You can't go every day. You're restricted in terms of how many days a month you can go. And they also charge you, not just you, but also the foreigners who come in, 6,000 yen per ticket to pay for addressing gambling addiction in Japan. So it's gambling addiction is really a big deal. It's a huge sleeping deal. You probably don't anticipate much of it, but the generation of 6,000 yen per person when they go to gamble, you've got to imagine that eventually one of the scandals that we're going to be talking about in Japanese politics is what happened to the money that was generated from this fund, because it's going to be an enormous amount of money, and it's just too ripe for ignoring it for some politicians. And like I said earlier, with the vice minister who was implicated in wind generation, taking a bribe from one of the companies. Those kinds of things are easy to do and difficult to hide, although it does go on for in a lot of different industries. So getting back to the integrated resorts, they anticipate per year 20 million people coming in as guests, and they can't survive. It's like a lot of things like tourism in Kyoto. They say that if the Chinese are restricted from coming in, even though there's a lot of foreign visitors to Kyoto, but they really need the Chinese visitors. With regard to casinos, it's particularly important there because the Chinese come in, they are big gamblers, and they're big fish that come in, these whales that come in from China. And they've said that, without the ability of the Chinese to come in to this casino and integrated resort, it's not going to be as robust as it should be. So eventually the Chinese will be able to travel more freely, and they will be coming to Yume no Shima in hordes, it is predicted. So just as a bit of a background, Yume no Shima is an artificial island. It's been constructed over the last 20 years. Initially, it was planned to be the host of the 2008 Olympics, and Japan lost that bid. And then when they finally did win the bid, it went to Tokyo, not to Osaka. So there's always this fight between Tokyo and Osaka. They lost that bid. So the next big thing there was the Expo, and the Expo is beginning to have a little bit of suffering there, as we talked about earlier. And so the next big deal is integrated resorts. They fought hard for it so that it would be housed in Yume no Shima. So it's all integrated. What's going on with Ishin taking over the government in the prefecture and in the city, the governorship as well, and this continuing competition between Tokyo and Osaka continues. So it's something to keep your eye on. I hope that's somewhat responsive to the question at issue, Maya.
Yes, great. I also wanted to add that in this coming issue of Japan Expert Insights Update, the newsletter, we will try to do a better overview. When I say a better overview, Timothy, it means in more detail. So if somebody wants to know more details, please consider signing up for the update, because it's a 2-week bi-weekly update. And if you signed up, please make sure that it goes into your inbox, not your spam folder. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Timothy, for that. We have a question on LinkedIn as well from Leno. And Leno says, "Hi, Timothy. You probably covered this before, but just in case you can share again, is there anything you can tell us about the 3 or Sanman digital coupon per child that the government has recently distributed? Is there any information pertaining to it? If there is, it would be helpful."
I'm not sure which program you're talking about, but the Japanese government did issue coupons for how large your family was, and there was a big brouhaha about it. Komeito, who is their coalition partner, pretty much pushed the issue so that it would be more per family, and that the income cap would be released, so that even if it's a rich family, they could still apply for that subsidy and receive it. The thinking being that if you're above a certain income level, you're just going to bypass it. You're going to exercise a little bit of patriotism and not extract that from the government, even though you have the right to. But the people who are in the lower income brackets, if you have 2 kids or 3 kids, even 4 kids, you get a little bit more of a push from the government. So I think a lot of that was as a consequence of COVID. I think the subsidy program died out. Also, the subsidy program for gasoline ends this month. So once again, we were talking about, share prices and the stock market, and, the yen dollar value being at 143. So they're stopping the subsidy for gasoline and energy costs this month. So it hasn't happened yet, but this month. Also, there will be another 20,000 items that are going to be increasing in price this month, followed by another 5,000 next month. So the cost of living is going to increase. The cost of gasoline and energy is going to increase. And the amount of money that is being given to families who have children, I got to imagine that there is another program, because the prime minister has devoted another big group of money, a large amount of money for the next 3 years to encourage people to have more children. So I think this might be part of that program. But it sounds to me that you're hungry to participate in that because you have 1 or 2 kids and you're not sure how that subsidy is working. I can't give you current information on that. Maybe let me take a look at it and report to you next week. But I know that there's a lot going on in that area. Maybe you are eligible if you have kids for the Sammayan per child, but right now I don't have good current information on that.
Let's work on that and talk about it again next week. So thank you for that, Timothy. And I would like to go a little bit back to the political part of this. You talked about the governor of Tokyo, Ms. Yuriko Koike, and I wonder, of course, their expectations that she will actually run again for a 3rd term as governor, Tokyo governor. But do you think that there are any chances of her going back to real politics, state politics?
So that question is asked to me pretty frequently, and I try not to laugh when I hear that.
Okay.
And the reason why I try not to laugh is, if you put yourself in Ms. Koike's position, she's the governor of the largest city in the world, and she doesn't have to deal with, at the level that the prime minister has to deal with, all of the bickering and backstabbing and the cabinet and stuff like that. She does have to deal with it, but as a governor, it's a different kind of political mix than being the prime minister. And I think if she were to switch from being the governor of Tokyo to maybe running in the lower house, she would definitely run in the lower house. She would definitely win a seat in the lower house. But the only reason why she would do that is so that she could become prime minister. And that's going to take an election or 2 in order for her to do that. So if she gives up her seat as governor and she runs in the lower house seat between now and when that election constitutionally must occur, and that's about 1.5 years away, she'll have to sit in that position until there is maybe a race for prime minister, and it could happen as soon as she becomes a member of the parliament. But I think even just with 1 year under her belt, she's not going to be able to develop the political weight to legitimately run for prime minister. She has to run against other candidates who have been, jockeying for that position for years. So she does have good pull. she's got a lot of weight. I mean, all of the people who are in Tokyo are not going to vote for her. 10% of the population, 10% of the voting population, in fact, would not necessarily vote for Koike. But she's good as a politician. But I think from her perspective, why would I put myself through all of that when I've got a good job here? I can run the government of Tokyo. When the prime minister needs to talk to somebody, he needs to talk to me. Tokyo is the home base for the entire government of Japan. The parliament and the bureaucracy is here. So it's not like she's isolated, and it's not like she doesn't have her own political base and her own political power. So I think for me, and I haven't talked with her about this. She hasn't asked, although I think she's probably listening in. That taking that what she has built now as a springboard, she's I just don't see it. I don't see what the allure would be without just a massive amount of headaches. And of course, the LDP has been running business almost since the end of the war. We had a little brief hiatus there, but that's the LDP. She's not part of the LDP. She was part of the LDP. She left. So many people in the LDP don't like her. They consider her to be somebody that betrayed them and then started her own political party. Yeah, it's difficult to envision that would be a good gamble. So I hope that's somewhat comprehensive.
Yes, thank you. So Gabor has a couple of comments about that. First, he says that that ship has sailed. That ship for her
Yeah.
has sailed already, hopefully. And also that, well, she's probably never given up dreaming of being prime minister, having the top job. And she's made attempts to go back in 2017. It led to a crushing defeat and many casualties and the eventual death of the old DPJ. And not just the allure, the doors are shut. She's one of the Koizumi children originally disliked by many in the LDP. Okay, thank you, Gabor, for the comments. Yes,
I think your characterization that the ship has already sailed, Gabor, is spot on. She could have done it maybe 2 elections ago. She's much more popular. She's much more polished. She's much more attractive as a potential candidate for prime minister now than she was back then. But I think, like you said, timing and dynamics, it's just not a good mix. But you never know. It's Japanese politics.
It's Japanese politics indeed. Okay, and then next we go back to the ER, excuse me, not the casino topic, but the ER topic. From Ren, we have, well, 2 questions actually. One of them is pachinko, why, or no, it's more like disbelief maybe, is Pachinko Association against the casino project? I guess because it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
yes, I think.
Yes,
that's true. So the integrated resorts law, the legislation, was created kind of unusually. We've talked about this before. This was an idea that was conceived by the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And it was an idea that came out of his faction and promoted into the Diet as legislation. Usually when legislation occurs, it comes through the bureaucracies. They're trying to refine something. They're trying to address an issue. They come up with a proposal for a law. They work with the politicians, with the various political parties. They come up with a bill. They chew on the edges of it. They spit it out, and they vote on it, and it becomes a bill. It becomes a law. With the integrated resorts, this all occurred with members of the Abe faction, and so it was promoted there. The fact that it has eventually become law, and it is now going to be an integrated resort that consists of, I mean, the reason why the integrated resort has a casino and the casino only occupies 3% or less of the floor space is because there was so much opposition to having a casino in the first place. So they had to glom on other things to make it palatable and tasteful for the Japanese people. The Pachinko Association, they're kind of unregulated. I mean, the cops visit them. They are being watched, but there's a lot of dark money. There's a lot of North Korean involvement there. As you might know, I don't know how many people in the room actually play pachinko on a regular basis, but most of the management of the pachinko parlors are Korean for some dynamic historical reason. There are Japanese that are running it too, and it's you know. I don't know if dominated is the right word, but there are some dark elements of the Japanese crime syndicate that are also involved, because it's an easy way to make money and skim money. It's like running a restaurant. You submit your bills, you submit your receipts, but since it's a cash business, it's easy to make money there. So for the pachinko owners, I mean, look how much money they generate. I mean, I think my reports are, and I might not have reported it. So let me go back to where my, okay, so there are 7,600 pachinko parlors in Japan. They generate 14 trillion yen per year in 2020. That's 1/30th. I mean, the amount that is being generated by the projected to be generated by the Osaka integrated resort is 1/30th of what the pachinko parlors generate in Japan nationwide. So they generate a tremendous amount of money, and of course they're jealous, and they don't want anybody to step on their parade. And if Japanese people are somewhat addicted, every Sunday they go and they play pachinko. They take some of their salary and they kind of gamble it. Sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. It does become something of a habit and a pastime. So yeah, I think the pachinko operators are cautious of that. But at the same time, if you're really a pachinko addict and you go all the time, you can go anytime. You can go, nobody's watching, right? With the integrated resorts, you can only go maybe once a month. You pay your fee to get in, but they monitor that as well. So even if the pachinko operators are a little bit angry that somebody's squeezing them, I don't think it's such a big deal. And the money that is being generated from ticket sales is going to be going into addressing gambling addiction. And I think probably more gambling addiction is, when they talk about it, they're talking about boat racing, horse racing, and pachinko, not the integrated resorts kind of gambling. It's too early to kind of determine that.
Is there any information whether pachinkos will be incorporated in the integrated resorts, or is it going to be just no?
outside of that? Yeah. So integrated resorts will have the slot machines. They might, depending on demand, integrate pachinko into that, but I think probably the power of the Pachinko Association will keep that out, so that there will be these loud, noisy, gaudy pachinko parlors near the stations that will continue to be there. And in fact, it might be enhanced if once Japan acknowledges the ability to legitimately gamble. It could be a new thing for us. But I think the overspill of many other things, for example, entertainment and theater, for example, will just explode here. I think it's been somewhat undeveloped. I mean, most of the entertainment television has been controlled by NHK and by just a few television stations. And when you watch these television dramas or television movies, it's the same 30 or 40 actors in all of these films. And none of them have really reached international acclaim, even though there's some really terrific Japanese actors. Very few have gone elsewhere and made a big deal out of it. So I think this is kind of an act event that you will see more foreign talent coming into Japan, the Japanese becoming a little bit more astute, a little bit more exposed to theater, to cinema. You know, I mean, nobody in the world wants or can shoot a full-length feature film in Tokyo. I mean, they've tried it a couple of times with disastrous results. So even the film companies are not, you know, and everybody's interested in Japan. If they had a film industry here where the foreigners could come in and film, I think it would be great for the country, for the economy, for tourism, but it's just really way too difficult. So integrated resorts, I think, is going to be the act event that really turns a lot of things on its head. It's really something to look forward to.
Great. Well, thanks for the answer. And we're once again going back to the taxes and raising taxes. Next, we have a question from Ted Gover, and it reads, is it possible that Japan may need to raise taxes at some point?
Yeah.
No, sorry, I misread it. Okay, it's possible that Japan may need to raise taxes at some point in order to cover the defense needs. Are there international discussions for starting a campaign to educate the public about the need to raise taxes, or is this just too controversial a topic right now?
So read the last part of the question once again. Is it
Are
possible?
there
Are there what?
Are there international discussions for starting a campaign to educate the public about the need to raise taxes, or is this just too controversial a topic right now?
Yeah, I would say no. Nobody wants anybody in the international community to opine on whether Japan raises taxes or not. I mean, the UN came in to wag their finger at Japan for the sex abuse of Johnny's Gym Show. I mean, why do you need the UN to come in and tell you that this shouldn't be done, that this should have been addressed, that everybody that turned a blind eye as Johnny Kitagawa was abusing these kids over a career of 40 years? I mean, you have to have the UN come in and do that? And even the minor investigation that was conducted by Johnny's Gym Show, or even by the Japanese government, it was just a kind of a paper trail. And the UN came in and really lambasted the entire industry for allowing this to go on. So with regard to taxes, which is even a huger issue, and also, unlike the sex abuse, the Japanese government has a legitimate opinion of saying, mind your own business. This has nothing to do with you. I know everybody's eager about, defense spending from Japan, but, bugger off. It has nothing to do with you. So I don't think that internationally that would come about. And I also appreciate the fact that the prime minister can't do it. I mean, he's already underwater. If he did that, he would, maybe he would come up with that idea, with the idea that he's going to push that through the parliament. There's going to be a lot of protests. It's going to pass. The consumption tax will go from 10% to 12% in 1 year's time, and then he would fall on his sword and resign, and then a new prime minister would come in. Maybe that's in the works. I kind of doubt it. I think more likely, just as we described, they're going to sell the shares that they have in NTT and Japan Tobacco, in all of these assets that the Japanese government holds great land holdings, land, port facilities that would be ripe for privatization. So there's money available, and in the Japanese economy, there are people that would purchase these assets, but the Japanese government, if it's going to be investing, it needs to invest at 33% or more. And so there's money to be had, but there's also legitimate legislation that needs to be addressed. Mr. Hagiura just said this last week with regard to NTT shares being sold, that it could happen as early as this month. I don't even know if the law has been revised to allow the Japanese government to go below the 33% level. And also with regard to holding the NTT shares. So the Japanese government purchased the shares through some form, or for example, with the metropolitan subway system, they invested in building it in concert with the Tokyo city government. So it's an investment that was generated by sweat equity. But for example, with NTT, it doesn't mean that they would sell all of their 33.4% of the shares, but it also hurts because, let me see, where's my note on that? It also generates a revenue. So if they sell let's say they sell the entire shares that the Japanese government holds in NTT, they also have to give up let me see, the generation of revenue that they get as a dividend. So that's a huge amount too. So they might sell the shares. It would be a one hit. They would have a big hit to their bottom line. But once again, the revenues that the Japanese government enjoys every year based on the dividend payments of these shareholdings, they would have to come up with that. So like Ted said, is it a long-term view? Is it a short-term view? It's yet to be seen. But I think the Japanese government has decided we can't raise taxes. We've got to come with a different bag of tricks. And the closest one is these big shareholdings in these very popular, very blue chip kind of Japanese companies. And I think that's the direction they've decided to go. But getting back to Ted's question, no, nobody wants to hear anybody else say, you know, why don't you sell some of this, or why don't you increase your taxes? I think that would be very unwelcome advice, especially coming from, for example, the ambassador from the United States making that sort of a suggestion or comment. I mean, he's already in trouble for agitating for LGBTQ and passing the legislation that is more accommodating to what his particular view is, and his view expressed by a coalition of other ambassadors that he put together. So it's very delicate. I think most people would stay away from that. Thanks, Ted.
Thank you. Well, great. And it looks like we have exhausted the questions for today. There are no more comments. So, Timothy, that's all. Thank you very much indeed. So
I wish I was with Evan working on the boat. Sorry, Evan.
Right. Okay. Sorry, there is one more comment here from Ted. My question was about internal discussions within Japan about taxes.
Okay, that's a different issue. So maybe Maya misinterpreted the international to the internal.
Yes.
So yeah, so that question makes a little bit more sense. Inside Japan, yes, and it mostly comes from the opposition party. Probably not Komeito, but the opposition parties are going to be complaining to the Japanese government. You're spending this money. We're trying to increase the economy and enrich the economy, and you're spending all this money with no plan for how you're going to pay for it. You need to increase the taxes. You need to take the consumption tax from 10% to 12%. So I think that they would be saying that maybe with a little bit of crocodile tears, because they know that that would hurt the prime minister. So then they can sit in the sidelines and say, ha ha, you know, you're diminishing, and we need a new prime minister because you've raised taxes and everybody hates you. So vote for us and we're going to be repairing the Japanese economy. So internally, yes. And there's also, even within the LDP, people are scratching their heads and sharpening their pencils and kind of licking the points, figuring out how can we do this? How can we achieve all of the things? The prime minister wants to increase defense spending from 1% to 2%. He wants more people to have children. He wants to devote, several billion yen per year so that people feel better about themselves and more hopeful for the future. How do you pay for that? How do you actually achieve that? It's not just money that does that. I mean, it's psychology too. So he wants to do that. He wants to make sure that Japan is upscale for chip production and going back down to the basics of manufacturing and high-end consumer products, and also software, reflecting back to Evan's first question about what's the mix. How is Japan still in the doldrums when it used to be the king of the mountain? So all of these things cost money. They take a lot of political thought and dividing what is available. And I think really, I mean, the economy being as it is, it would really be suicide for the prime minister to come up this year. We've only got 4 more months left in this year anyway, to come up with a proposal to increase the consumption tax. I think the economy wouldn't take it. It would just tank if that came up. So yes, people are talking about it. There are backroom fights about it. We catch wind of it from time to time, but I don't think it's a serious discussion at this point in time.
Right. Okay. And then one more from Ted again. Are there internal discussions in Kishida's administration about possibly raising taxes to raise funds to increase defense spending, or is that too controversial? I guess it's probably a clarification of the question.
So within the cabinet, so he's got the cabinet, and then each of the cabinet ministers have vice ministers or parliamentary vice ministers. So each cabinet minister has two kind of second people. One of them comes from the Diet, and one of them comes from the ministry. And so a lot of the discussions, for example, Mr. Kihara, who is in trouble because of his wife and her former husband being murdered, I think we can say with clarity, it was a murder. It wasn't a suicide. I think that is the conclusion of the public prosecutor's office now. But anyway, to be embroiled in that, that was Mr. Kishida's right-hand man, very involved in issues such as raising taxes. So there are some people that have a facility for that. For example, the vice minister for land, transportation, and tourism. The vice minister was involved with wind generation and offshore generation of wind through turbines, and he became embroiled in a bribery scandal, and now he is out. But these are kind of the soldiers. The minister also has his own role, but it's different from who the vice ministers are. And there are people there that have in-ground. I mean, this fellow who was implicated in the bribery, he's one of the Zokugin for, generation of green technologies and moving Japan into renewable energy, that sort of thing. He's been doing it for 15 years. So he's a well-known expert in it, and he's now out of a job. But there are a lot of area experts who are occupying these positions. And some people are saying, as an economist, you have to raise the taxes because of the mix here. So there are different voices there. And politics is all about weighing that, and whether something is a legitimate opportunity to take advantage of something, you still have to pass it through the sieve of public sentiment. So that's politics, and that's what we focus on. So yeah, it's going on very heatedly. It is August, so a lot of people are off, but yes, the Diet is still going. The bureaucracy is still moving in full gear. And as we report every week, there's always something going on. So whether the Diet is in session or not.
Well, thank you very much for that. Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Timothy. And let me have one more look. Okay. Yes, so we have finished with the comments and the questions, and that's all for the moment. Thank you very much. You can go. I don't know whether you're going to the boat today or not. Maybe not, but whatever your day is, so enjoy it. To everybody who stayed with us, it was a pleasure having you again. And we'll be here. Yes?
Don't forget to like and comment and share, right? So this is the kind of revenue that we get. We don't charge people for doing this briefing, but if you like what you see, if you participate, if you add a comment, if you like or share, or if you link up with either Maya or me or Japan Expert Insight, it does help boost this exercise that we go through every week. So thank you very much for doing that. And by the way, these numbers just keep growing, Maya. Every week we exceed the numbers from the week before. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, have a great day, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you.